folks, and welcome to the second podcast on energy flow through ecosystems, part 2, photosynthesis. Now we have to ask this question, where do plants get their food? We know that consumers get their food by simply eating it, and eating allows them to have some energy and also gives them some matter for their growth and life processes. But where do plants get their food? And most of you would tell me, well, through photosynthesis, like you told us. However, photosynthesis uses light energy, and the plants are able to capture that light energy like no other organism and use it for their life processes. But where does the extra material come from for the plant to actually grow, to gain mass? And you might also think, okay, well, the plants are in soil, so they must get the extra material to build their body parts, the leaves, the roots, the stems, from material in the soil. Well, I want you to consider this famous experiment. It was first done back in the 1600s by a very smart physician. His name was Johann Baptist van Helmont. He was a physician, famous for lots of things, and especially for this experiment. He took a willow sapling and weighed it, got 2.3 grams for the weight of the tree, and planted it in some soil. He weighed the soil first, and the start weight of the soil was 90.9 kilograms. And after about 5 years of watering this tree and taking care of it, it did grow quite considerably. The tree had gained nearly 75 kilograms in mass. Pretty impressive. But something curious happened. The soil had lost only about 0.1 kilogram of mass. So Van Helmont suspected what had happened. He knew that the water that he was giving to the tree must have been used to gain some of its mass, but he also knew, like most botanists, that the tree had evaporated most of that water through its leaves in the process of transpiration. And so he had identified another hidden variable, the fact that the tree was exposed to the air. Gases in the air could account for the gain in the mass. And so he set out to answer this question. And you know today that the plant merely uses the light energy to drive the chemical process of photosynthesis that combines carbon dioxide from the air and water from the soil to make food, or glucose, as you know. It's a carbohydrate. And then the plant can then use that for its energy source and to build any body part that it needs. So back to plants and what they need in order to grow properly. So we're going to look a little bit more into photosynthesis. First of all, you know that carbon dioxide comes from the air. There is very little carbon dioxide in the air. Most of our air is nitrogen gas, about 80% nitrogen gas. The other 19-20% is about oxygen, and there's less than 1% carbon dioxide gas in any given time. The water, of course, comes from the soil and from the environment, and the light comes from, hopefully, the sun or some other unnatural source to drive that process. It's all plants really need to grow. If we don't talk about some of the other minute nutrients that the soils provide for the plants, and that's for another discussion, but we're just talking about matter and energy here. So here's our chemical equation of photosynthesis, and it's simply a balanced equation here. As you can see, some of the formulas that you might be familiar with. 6 carbon dioxides plus 6 water molecules with the light energy. The plant is capable of creating this molecule C6H12O6, many of you know as glucose, and a waste product of oxygen, which is where most of our atmosphere's oxygen comes from. Let's understand this a little bit more closely. To get the big picture, let's look back at the leaf anatomy that we studied a few weeks ago. So we have some of this vocabulary. We know that the leaf blade is the broad part of the leaf. Its stem is really called the petiole that's attached to the twig or the plant itself. You've got these midribs and veins and smaller types of small netted veins that carry the water from the roots all the way up to each cell in the leaf. Have you heard of chlorophyll? Chlorophyll, as you might know, is in plants. It's a green-colored chemical, and it's necessary for plants to actually do photosynthesis. There are other type of chemicals that plants have to do this, but chlorophyll is by far the most efficient at doing this. There are some chemicals that are yellow, other chemicals that are reddish and brown that can do the same thing, but we're going to stick with green plants, and chlorophyll being green is found in the cells of all plants and an organelle called a chloroplast, and the chloroplast is really the machinery of photosynthesis. So the next slide shows a diagram of leaf cells and their chloroplast. So let's look a little bit more closely. Here's one plant cell with its rigid cell wall, large vacuole in the middle, which stores the water. But what we really want to focus on is right here, the chloroplast. It's green because of the chlorophyll, and it's got everything that it needs, all the chemicals that it needs in order to capture the light and convert the water and carbon dioxide into food. Okay, so chloroplasts are an important organelle to remember when we're talking about light capturing process of photosynthesis. Now let's back away even further here, and we look at a leaf and sort of peel it away. And this is not to scale, of course, but the leaf itself has many layers of cells up to. And so here's a cross section through a leaf of the many layers of cells. We have cells on the outside called the epidermis. Those are protective cells that secrete a waxy coating called a cuticle. Cuticle is just that, it's wax, keeps the plant cells from drying out. Underneath the epidermal layer are the real working cells of photosynthesis. They're called palisade or parenchymal cells. You don't need to remember their names, but that's where the heaviest concentration of chloroplasts are. So they're doing most of the photosynthesis, and they're near the top of the leaf where they can get the most sunlight. But around these cells there's a lot of airspace and some supporting cells that create the airspace. Those air spaces are like the lungs of the cell because they allow the exchange of gases from the environment into the plant cells. And of course, during photosynthesis, the plants are interested in getting carbon dioxide from the air into the, and so the stoma allow air to come in, and that's where the exchange of carbon dioxide with the cells can occur. Oxygen leaves the stoma during photosynthesis, and water is delivered by the xylem and the small netted veins that surround each of the cells. Here's a microscope slide of a cross section through a leaf up in the upper left hand corner. You can see that layer called the spongy layer, where it's really filled with air spaces. You can see the parenchyma cells and certainly see the epidermal cells on the outside protecting the leaf from drying out. And on the lower right hand side behind me is a lab picture of how you would interpret what you're seeing under the microscope, and it's labeled. To sum it up, plants combine carbon dioxide from the air and water from the soil to make glucose. The energy needed for this process comes from the sunlight. The sunlight is absorbed by chlorophyll contained in the chloroplasts of the leaf. The glucose can be used for energy or to make other substances. To make those other substances, the glucose has to be combined with other chemical elements such as nitrogen, potassium. And these are the substances that the plant actually gets from the soil. And that concludes our podcast on energy flow through ecosystems part 2, photosynthesis. It's by no means all the details on photosynthesis, but you'll get that in due time. Thanks, and we'll see you back in class. You can pause the video here and make sure you get everything from this slide because it's a very, very important summary.